Jack, this one's for you. Another question I have, Jack writes, is to what extent do you think that the aesthetics and craft you practice and describe are linked to the creation of Northlight Studios or to the creation of new Northlight Studios and the continued maintenance of current ones? I like this question. It's being had between a number of us right now, and I'll pick up on a number of those interesting aspects of why we think the way we do. I always noticed that photographs of art classes in the 19th century and early 20th century invariably are taking place in studios with large north-facing windows. Can you talk about the current state of Northlight Studios? Actually, on that last point, there are a few scenes of studios in, I don't even remember if they were Paris or not, but European studios where they're actually using gas lamps. They got lights all over the place. I'd have no idea how that could possibly work out well, but unless they have some massive torch in front of I don't know how they do that. But there was one like that. But yes, you're right. Most studios, the images that you see, paintings of the studios in action or whatever, or photographs, the light is clearly north light, coming usually from quite a high source. A studio I had before the one I have now actually had windows that started, I believe, at about 12 feet, and maybe they went to 18 feet. So we had these windows set way up there. I've seen a number of studios like that. You're in New England, so there are interesting things to talk about in terms of the uses and and sort of difficulties of north light. For example, the difference between a sunny day and a gray day, or even worse, a day in which you have clouds spotting their way along through the sky, flashing lights into the studio on a regular basis, sometimes this way and sometimes that way. Sometimes slow-moving clouds that you start hitting color notes, changing color notes before you even notice the sky has changed. Now, I think that what happens today with the advent of artificial light is that people believe that you now have solved that. The problem has gone away. And they're right. I mean, in other words, you now have steady light. The question for an impressionist is it better? And I'm not a scientist on the subject, but in my personal explorations of it, my perception is that the spectrum, which is significant, if you actually are drawing forth from nature the beauties, the richness, the varieties of the richness that's available, it seems to be much greater in nature than any best light spectrum that I've seen. I'd be hard pressed to believe actually that any new color spectrum is even capable of producing what the rainbow does, for example. And therefore, your options are definitely different. The richness, the very I don't want to say complexity, but the richness is probably a better word. The texture. Yeah, it's kind of a misused word. The way I'm using it is kind of an off use of that word, but there's something about that is almost like, ask me how to get all the other sounds out of my ears so I can just hear the person talking to me and can't hear the wind blowing and can't hear the birds chirping and all the other things. I feel like what's happening to us with artificial light, all benefits aside, is that you're diminishing the choices you have, which limits the aesthetic choices you have. So, and to me, that's pretty huge. I mean, the camera does the same thing. You take photographs, full color photographs all day long, play them on a screen in front of you. They're nothing. They may appear to you at first to be as rich as nature, but having looked over and over at these things, they're almost always tilted in a very odd way, where they're more blue or more this or more that. And then the question is, can they actually, through a lens, convey the richness of nature that your eye can see before it's been filtered, before something else has happened to it? Well, so the argument about Northlight is that it's steady relative to a sunny south side or something else, the sun moving all day long, it's not steady. And then you'd argue, of course, that impressionists, well, they're painting outdoors in the sun. What's steady about that? So you get 20 minutes and out, as Monet would do it. If you really care about the moment, you might have a 20-minute blink in which it's adequately light for you to begin to draw forth some of that magic with intrinsic unity. And in all these cases, somebody who's concerning himself primarily with drawing, and I do see some of the Hudson River types, whose colors are so unlike nature as to be obviously putting themselves in the ranks of somebody who could care less about color as nature brings it. So they're not harvesting in the same way. In a sense, you could argue that their mind's already made up. Much like, in a way, I think you'll find that if a person sets a palette for painting human skin, he'll paint, he can paint skin that will do X. But when the circumstances of the person that you're working with are such that in a certain background there's a certain other kind of magic, what are you going to do? Paint his color just, X, something out of your book? Or are you going to actually research the whole paradigm, the whole panoply of choices, and search through and find the best way of expressing what the flesh is doing before this particular background? That's way more the juiciest stuff that Impressionism is made out of. So even though people are painting from life, when they paint with formulas and all those sorts of things, they're going to do better. They're not going to have any problem with using artificial light. But they won't have any trouble using Northlight either, except that they can manage to erase all the problems of day changes and that sort of thing. If you go online, by the way, you'll see the difficulties one faces. If you go online to my GBA time-lapse video where I'm painting a portrait on YouTube, where I'm painting a portrait and it's been reduced down to 90 seconds, I think. That's the one that makes the most sense. But you can see the model going darker, lighter, and changing colors as we speak. And when you have a portrait in which you have for example, a deadline, you have to paint on days that aren't impressionistically like other days. And so on those days, you find out what you can work with. You learn to be experienced so that you can work with things without changing the larger general color scheme. You can work with elements of the picture. You could argue that you could change a proportion or something like that without changing the color. So, but those are difficulties that are inherent in our pursuit of the truth in front of us at this moment. This harks back to Louise's statement earlier about whether we actually sort of want the fluctuations of nature because there's so much potential variety, so many things that we can actually begin to access. So, if you're sort of expecting your pictures to do the same thing every time, yeah, I would say probably any artificial light will do fine. But if you actually want to harvest the magic of the differences and be able to find your poetry there, and the rich variety of poetry that's available there, I think you'll probably be accessing Northlight despite the difficulties. And in fact, to some degree, maybe because of them. What happens on a cloudy day, and a particular type of cloudy day, is so interestingly different from what happens on a sunny day with blue light above you. Or even a snowy day is a little different, depending on the circumstances. But it's not that difference. The difference adds a level of complexity, difficulty. It does add that, without any question. And I wouldn't argue that if you can get a light that is sort of, as it were, big enough, as opposed to a very narrow, sharp little light on a figure, you could, or even using both those kinds of lights, you can get a variety of things to happen for the purposes of drawing, that none of which is bad, So working from a cast or something like that with artificial light probably is as good a use as you're going to ever make of it, and you don't particularly need the difficulties associated with the color and other things of the Impressionist Northlight. But I think the difficulty of that is that you don't get into your head, if you're going to be a Northlight painter, you won't get into your head that you need to get practiced at these variations in how the how the values shift when the light changes and that sort of thing, which you really need to get to know and be conversant with early on, as early as possible, so that it's part of your, But if you go in, if you're going to dodge it and never really work with this stuff, that's different. Let me see if I've finished with these questions here. The question of the new ones. I don't know. I haven't been in all sorts of different people's studios, a handful. I was in the Fenway studios for a bunch of years, and they were designed on Paris studios, and some of some of us here, some of our artists of the turn of the last century, were providing when they were providing these windows, these studios for painters, were taking the advice of painters who had been to Paris and what they conceived as the best models of that light. And typically they start like as high as 14 feet, so in that range, and come down, and then you have your choice. And their widths are typically 6 feet, and then in some windows, some studios, there's 3 different windows that size. In my studio, the one I've designed for myself, I have one great central window, and I have 2 smaller ones on either side. And I start really high. I started 20-some feet high because I really like the possibilities of getting really good near top light because of what it does to form, the way it helps you with form. And I like the ability to move your lights higher and lower. But the more of a side light you get, the less you express the underplanes. So there are reasons to do that, but there are various things. Certain people look better in certain lights, and I'm kind of an explorer when I have the opportunity to do it. So, but the movement of light from a particular direction and that sort of thing, that's all in your hands, or you can control that, obviously, with artificial light, maybe even a lot easier. But I don't know what else people are doing right now, the new ones, but that's what I know about the old ones. It's not difficult at all to face a studio due north in terms of light, and so that the sun comes in, just say at the middle of summer, the sun is coming into the studio about the same amount and hitting the wall for about the same period of time as when it goes out at the end of the day. But those kinds of concerns are probably the most important ones you have. Get your windows high enough, get them big enough. I like the model that you use when you're talking. Sir Joshua Reynolds, I think he wanted a 30-degree angle of your light to the model, and he wanted a window roughly 6 by 6 or 5 by 5, I forget what his feet, as the ideal light. And, so many of those things keep being set out for us as the ideal. I suggest that's a good place to try to start, and exploring is good. You start with a bigger one and be able to reduce it, try it this way and that. What I like about the studios we're in now in Lawrence is that the windows are big enough for us to do all kinds of good things like that. They're very high, and they're as wide as we want. They are fairly close. These 3 sets of windows are fairly close to each other, so the pillars between them are almost not even obstructing the light, so I can make a quite wide window if I chose to. So, yeah. But no, I don't want to become this guy who is just the only thing. But if you're an impressionist and you don't know the difference between the richness of daylight versus any of the best full spectrum light that's out there, and if you just think about it, it's got to exist. And I've painted in them all, and I enjoy the light in all of them. But there's something about that, and there's also something about just talking about nature, and the artificial light just somehow or other is a step removed from nature, just like the camera is a step removed from nature. And you're not really drawing forth from nature precisely as Ang would like you to do, You're not drawing your beauty directly from nature, you're drawing it from something that's already affected nature. And so those are interesting questions. I don't want to make a religion out of that stuff. But I do think it's well worth thinking through. And I'd suggest that the enjoyment of Northlight, there's something healthy in it. Daylight coming into your studio all the time, as opposed to being locked up in a basement somewhere. So, I can make other further arguments. I really enjoyed this conversation, though, oddly enough, Jack. And it's because, so much of what we have is detail-oriented. I think Benson said your studio can eat your lunch, basically. You really have to manage a good studio. Get predictable circumstances, manage the way you stand in relation to studios. You have good light on your easel all the time. Basically, be a good studio can make or break you. So one that you know how to use as well. So thank you very much, and do again subscribe, comment, share, like, all the rest. And thank you for being with us.